thought I would just record something around helping somebody deal with what's coming up when it feels like you're in a really uncomfortable place, right? When it feels like you've had a setback, you've had a flare up, or for whatever reason, because of circumstances, things are just feeling more difficult than usual. Things are feeling more uncomfortable. And what can we do in the moment to work through this? So I'll share the inquiries that I found particularly helpful, and we can run through that a bit. First thing I would say is just focus on what's here now. Don't get caught up in stories of past and future about what we should have done to avoid getting here, about what's going to happen now that we're in this difficult place. All of that is just a whole bunch of extra struggle and suffering we add on with the mind by imagining past and future. And the key here really is what that all is about is trying to avoid feeling what's here. We use these narratives of what I could have done or what I should have done, how I could have not ended up here, to avoid feeling something. It's that whole narrative of being upset with ourselves or being upset with life or being upset with circumstances. It's all like an avoidance mechanism to go up into the mind and get away from what we're feeling here. Because maybe what we're feeling here is some intense shame or guilt or helplessness of not being able to control our situation, our environment, our sensations. And the mind doesn't want to go there. And the mind doesn't, like, you might not even realize this, right? So this isn't a judgment on anyone. This isn't saying, you shouldn't be using your mind. It's not a judgment. It's reflecting on how the mind works unconsciously. So don't judge yourself over this, but just realize that's what's happening when we go up into thoughts. That's what that is about. We learn to use the mind to avoid feeling something. And eventually you have to see that is making the struggle worse. That's what's making your situation worse. So until we see that, we're often going to be pretty unwilling to do this work. And I can't, all I can do is share from my own experience that it's worth it to go into those really dark, uncomfortable spaces to see that there's nothing there to resist. There's nothing there to run away from. There's nothing to run away from. But the only way to realize that, you can't just believe it. It can be helpful to understand that because that might make us willing to go there. That might be what we need to really undertake this exploration. But I can't force you to go there, and I wouldn't want to. It's an invitation, and it has to come from your own kind of realization that all of the coping mechanisms of the mind make things worse. All of the victim stories, all of the complaining stories of how bad things are, of what life's done to me, how unfair my situation is. You're only going to be willing to let go of that, not from me telling you to let go of that, from you yourself seeing that doesn't get you anywhere. So once we've seen that, then we open up the possibility to actually see what's going on here. Okay, I need to be honest with myself. That is all an avoidance, right? That is all trying to get away from something. And if we haven't acknowledged this in ourselves, then this could be very triggering. Me talking like this, it will be threatening to those mind identities. The identity that wants to cling on to something to blame, something to push against, that this is something's fault. But even that whole pattern, that is all innocent. That's a helpful foundation to start on, is just realize that everything is innocent. But again, if we're not willing to let go of some narrative of, but this isn't innocent, this did this to me. I mean, I can't make you do that. So that's just a caveat or something like that. So yeah, if this is triggering, maybe explore why. What is this bringing up in me that I don't like? What don't I want to let go of? But now the next step of the process, okay, once we realize this, we have the opportunity to really explore, what don't I want to feel? So this is probably one of my favorite inquiries. And it almost comes online naturally once we've practiced it enough, that whenever things are feeling struggly, difficult, uncomfortable, it becomes very clear after a while, this is how it is for me now, that there's something I must be not allowing myself to feel. And, be aware of projecting this outward, right? So it's so easy to get caught up in that, for example, I could be living at home and I want to meditate and, it's noisy or something like that. And if I just get caught up in the narrative, the reaction to it, it could be like, oh yeah, the reason I'm uncomfortable is because of my environment that I can't control. It's what everybody else is doing that's making me uncomfortable. And then you hold on to that and you turn yourself into a victim, and you kind of stay stuck because it's like, well, unless the environment changes, which is out of my control. I mean, sometimes, sure, change your environment if that's possible. But, if you're in a certain environment and that's where you are, then see how easy it is to get caught up in externalizing your struggle, blaming it on something, and then just see, okay, that's blame arising in my experience, but what don't I want to feel? So for me, it might be like, oh, I don't want to feel this helplessness, or even if we can't quite label it, that's not how the experience goes for me. Sometimes I'll put a label on it, like, oh yeah, that feels a little bit like helplessness, but that's not really the goal here. The goal is more just what in my experience feels like the last place I want to go. And it can be helpful to do this gently, right? Like, do this with love and compassion. Just like, what can I just explore this? Can I just open up to what I'm struggling to feel? What am I not allowing? What am I not allowing myself to feel? What am I believing shouldn't be here? Because once we go there, you'll see that there's nothing to not actually feel. It was just the belief. It was just the resistance on top of something. But at the root of the sensation, it's just sensation. It's just experience that's innocent. But it gets formed into this contracted feeling, and then we add on layers and beliefs on top of that. And then if we don't look at it closely enough, it's so easy to just have this uncomfortable contracted feeling and believe all of the interpretations of it. So, someone asked me, well, what's the end goal of doing this kind of deep trauma emotion work, going into these uncomfortable spaces? Surely I'm just going to keep coming back here forever. And that's like a doubt thought arising, right? That's the important thing to see when you're doing this work, is how quickly we'll bounce back into a thought. And then if we believe that thought, that's when we're going to have confusion and questions about this process. So all of that is fine, right? There's no judgment. There's nothing wrong with those thoughts arising. But identification is what matters, right? So if a thought comes up saying, no, why should I feel into this uncomfortable space? If I feel into it, I'm going to get worse. I'm going to get stuck here. It's not a good idea. And then we believe that thought, and then we go on thinking that thought, and we stop going to the spaces and we struggle. That's what happens with identification. Whereas if we can learn, and sometimes we have to go through those phases, right? We have to see, okay, I'm going to believe the thought. There's a pull, there's an allure to, there's a way out. There's a mental avenue that I can take. Maybe this idea that I've come up with is a way to avoid feeling this. And then we'll believe that and see where it leads us. And eventually we come to the space where we can start to see that I know that pattern. I know that where that leads. That is a resistance pattern. That is kind of a fishhook of the mind to say, like, here comes the fishhook. Are you going to grab onto it and believe it and get pulled away? Or eventually we start to get fed up with our mind. So when I say something like this, get fed up with our mind, I want to clarify that we're not trying to go to war with the thoughts. That's counterproductive. Is literally a thought fighting with a thought. You want to let the thoughts come. You want to go into these difficult spaces, and a thought will come saying, oh, I can't feel this. Maybe this is too much. Maybe this is going to make me worse. Maybe I'm going to get stuck here. And you can trust the emotion, but you want to not grab onto the thought, right? You just want to see that, oh, that's a thought. And then the next thought might come. And the thoughts will generally reflect the intensity of the experience as well. So, as we go into more difficult spaces, we get more to the root of what we don't want to feel. The mind can ramp up in intensity. The thoughts can get more kind of alarming. No, I'm going to get stuck here forever. I'm going to undo all the good work I've done. These are some examples of what the mind can produce. And again, often we will get caught by one of these. And it takes kind of a willingness to keep doing the work, to keep coming back. And to go back to what, just coming to mind, what somebody asked me was, but I just feel like I keep coming back to these spaces. And that's what will happen if we touch into it and then we drag ourselves away. And that's fine. Again, be gentle with yourself. This work takes coming back to, right? We don't just drop into shame and fully go to the root depths of it and it's all gone. There's a lot of resistance to work through, depending on the person, on the conditioning, on all of that. But you often have to explore these spaces and see where there's still resistance, where we're kind of still keeping distance. So another thing that might concern us is, can I trust the emotions? I've heard this a few times is, I don't know if I should trust the emotions. My mind is saying that the emotion is just an overreaction, and I want to rationalize the situation. I would say the other way around, right? It's fine to use rationalization to not get caught up in the narrative, right? So if we're feeling something and there's a lot of fear, like, oh, I'm going to die, this is too much, don't believe those thoughts, right? Rationalize yourself. No, okay, I'm sitting in a room. Sure, it might feel like I'm going to die, right? It really might feel like that in the body. But, okay, that's just a thought. That's where I would say that kind of logic can be used, is to see a thought as a thought. But trust the emotion, trust the feeling, because there is no narrative in the feeling, right? So you want to be able to see the narrative, and often the mind will get this the wrong way. It'll be like, no, I can't trust the feeling. That's going to make me worse. But there we're believing a thought, right? So if this is confusing, understanding that with this emotional experience, there's both the narrative and the thing we don't want to feel, the kind of tension in the body. It could be in your heart space, feeling contracted. It could be in your gut. It could be in your head. It could be in your shoulders. It could be whatever. It could be all over. But that's more of the sensation experience, right? And we can really simplify this work by just staying with the sensation. And part of the practice can be seeing when we bounce back into a thought. So can I stay with this really uncomfortable space that I don't want to go into? And can I, I don't know, I just find this helpful, is can I feel deeper into it, but in a way, if this is complicating it, you don't need to apply this, but this is just one way to go about this, is can I almost relax into that space? So it's not like we're trying to force a contraction away, but it's kind of just allowing. Often we contract down onto these spaces because there's so much resistance to it. So now when we start to go the other way, I want to feel into the discomfort. I want to feel into the emotion, but the physical sense of it. It can feel like going deeper, opening it up. But again, that's just a kind of pointer, really. This work isn't complicated. There's no magic technique here. The magic technique is to notice the narrative. That's the narrative. It's absolutely fine. Don't need to fight with it, but I don't want to identify with it. And then can I go into the body? So you could do this right now. You could listen to the words that I'm saying, but put some attention into, what do I want to get away from? What am I believing shouldn't be here? Often when we're in this situation, there's a strong belief about something. This is bad. And what if we now go there with, no, okay, I'm going to feel this. And it can be really helpful just to give yourself some time out to do this, right? So the way that we can start to do this is, when things are feeling difficult, just give yourself 5 minutes. When you see a distraction pattern coming online, be like, okay, I really want to go scroll online because I'm feeling tense. I'm feeling overwhelmed, and that's my usual distraction. But now I'm going to go sit for 10 minutes, and I'm literally going to surrender to whatever comes up. You can't get this wrong. That's such a helpful thing. Is like, I'm going to, what would it mean for 10 minutes to not try and control my experience? What would that mean? Go find out. And we get better at this. Like, that's the good news. It gets easier. It's things release, and then deeper things come to the surface. And your capacity is greater than you realize. Life will push your ego boundaries. Your mind will say, I cannot handle this for one moment when something difficult is coming up. Sure, it's not going to be like that all the time, but there can be periods. And that's just a thought. That's just a mental reaction. It's like, well, you are feeling it right now. So what would it mean to let go of the resistance? And you'll find your way through this. If your willingness to go deeper and to end your own suffering is there, then you will find your way through this. You will. Don't worry what the mind says. Just be willing to be sincere with yourself. See a thought as a thought. Be willing to go deeper. Be willing to go into the unknown, to let go beyond the familiar. And you will go deeper. Things will release. It's not an endless amount. The emotion work is finite, but you will probably have to experience things that you didn't think you could handle. So that's my sharing. And I can talk about this because that I'm sharing from my own experience. So I hope that helps. And just be gentle with yourself, right? Give yourself like my previous video was about nature, and that really is helpful. If it's just too much, then just take a break. Go sit and feel your feet on the grass, or go sit and stare at a tree, and just use that to help you, because it can get challenging. It can be difficult, and it's okay. But at the same time, you got to be willing to call yourself out when you're believing a narrative. So you got this.